Hi everyone, this is Michelle with the Warrior Painters podcast. In this episode, I talked to Wayne Tsay, a Vis Dev artist working at DreamWorks Feature. Wayne keeps an open mind on what paths to take and trusts that things will fall into place. Starting from architecture, Wayne eventually transitioned into animation, and you'll find out how his very first Warrior Painters session changed the course of his career.
My name is Wayne Tsay. I'm a visual development artist at DreamWorks, currently working on the sequel to the first Boss Baby movie. And I am a painter and I love painting. So I think that's probably why I'm here today to talk about my painting life.
So what were you like as a kid? Were you into drawing and art then too?
I think looking back upon it, I think at some point in my life I was, but at the same time, it's not like it was my focus. I think as a kid, I was just like any other kid. I like sports, I like going outdoors and doing stuff like skating, but there was always some sort of influence, and that was probably from my parents.
Oh, really? Were they artists?
Yeah, well, my dad's an architect who, probably has some influence on me. And my mom was, she studied fashion design in Taiwan.
Oh, cool.
So I guess like I do come from an artistic family, and, they did push that a little bit upon me. Well, they just assumed that I would like it too.
Oh, right.
Which is true. They're like, yeah, I know you, Wayne. You're going to like art. And so like, I think it was less about art as in painting, but more just some sort of nature about creativity or design.
Yeah, so they would have been really, I assume they are supportive of you doing like an art career and going into art.
Yeah, I think so. My dad's super chill about like my life, which is,
Is that where you get it from? Because you're pretty chill.
Maybe, yeah. It's like there's a level of trust in me. So I don't have that like super, super strict upbringing that, might be stereotypical amongst a lot of like Asians growing up. Yeah, he let me do whatever I want. And the irony is I ended up doing, at least for a little while, like following under his footsteps in architecture without him actually pushing me. It just sort of happened to be that way.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to talk about that too. Did you want to be an architect then when you were a kid?
I think for the lack of not knowing any better, kind of, I think for me, I was a pretty open-minded kid, open-minded person, and I didn't really care, what I ended up doing. And then there's that reality moment when you're a senior in high school and you have to start applying to colleges. And of course, my dad, he's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. And then, but he never like pushed me to do anything. So my strategy was to apply to like a bunch of different schools as different like subjects, because I had no idea, and just let like the fate of the world guide me. So for example, like I ended up going to UC Berkeley for architecture, but I applied to like UC Irvine for computer science, because that's what they're known for. I applied to UCSD for like biology, because that's what they're known for. Every college is like different. I applied to UCLA for like media arts, which was something that I actually really wanted to get into, but that was the one school I got rejected from.
Was media arts, is that like their animation program? Or?
I really still don't know. It's something close to film, and that was actually what I wanted to study.
Oh, that's interesting. So you wanted to be a filmmaker or get into film?
Yeah, that was actually probably my biggest interest when I was like in high school, and probably still so true to this day. And it's kind of the reason I switched from architecture to visual development, is to be able to work on movies. Even though it's not like a filmmaking role, it's still like a movie making contribution role. But yeah, long story short, I got into Berkeley architecture, and I also got into like Pratt architecture, which is a school on the East Coast in Brooklyn. who are like, they're like a super hardcore design school. I ended up choosing Berkeley.
How
But
come?
I don't know. Well, tuition.
Yeah.
And just close by. But yeah, the irony is I got accepted into like architecture programs. I realized that was probably what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's no regret or anything about it because I loved architecture school. I still love architecture, even though I don't do it for a living anymore. And everything, all the concepts that I learned in school undoubtedly have had like a pretty big influence on the way I approach things and the way I think. But yeah, I did the whole like multiple all-nighters a week thing, staying up all late in studio. No one ever saw me. But the thing is, I enjoyed it. I actually really enjoyed it, as opposed to a lot of people who just like burn out, or because it's really easy to, burn out. You really have to love some sort of weird process with creativity to be able to force yourself to stay up all night. Not, much less so for a grade than to just work on your project because you love your project and you love thinking about what you're working on.
And then how did you start joining the Warrior Painters?
Well, I remember my first session. I don't know if you remember my first session.
Was it the beach?
No, it was San Gabriel Mission.
Oh, yeah, actually.
Next to Gallery Nucleus, and they were having like a Nathan Fowkes show at the time. I was painting by myself for like a year because my old school painting group stopped painting. So I saw like the Weekend Warrior thing pop up on Facebook, and I was always like, oh cool, like there's new people painting, and I've been painting by myself for quite a while. So I was like, okay, I'll stop by, check out the Nathan Fowkes show. Like I was going to go there anyways and just check out who's there. And you were the only person that I knew, sort of like that we met
because of Art Center.
Yeah, because of that like one time at like Art Center workshops. I'm like, okay, cool. There's at least someone I know there, so I won't be completely like a stranger. But yeah, that was the first time I met like Angela and Kaylee. I remember seeing like David Merritt and Sherwin, and I didn't like talk to them at all because I'm not social in that way. But yeah, I saw Vaughn, and and I think there was more people there, but
yeah, and most people wouldn't know this, but these are all people that you end up becoming really good friends with or worked with.
Yeah. Like I didn't know at the time, like maybe 6 months later or 8 months later, like I would be sharing an office with David and working for Angela. So that, that one session actually was like profusely important to my life.
I thought we had a conversation where you were kind of trying to decide whether you wanted to get into animation. Like, what was that a debate for you, whether to stick with architecture? Because I think you were working in architecture at that point, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that goes back. Well, I haven't been in animation for that long. It's only like my second year. Yeah, going on to 3 years now. So,
wow.
I left architecture school, and I was introduced by one of my friends who was also an architecture major. But she was like, I don't want to do architecture. And at the time we were all in architecture school, like, pulling all nighters. I'm like, wait, what? Why are you here? And she's like, I did an internship for Pixar over the summer, and she wanted to do like 3D modeling and work on the 3D side of animation. And then she like showed me, Pixar stuff. And at the time, that was like 2010s. Pixar was like at the height of its, greatness. And I'm like, whoa, you can do that? So that was like kind of one moment where I was like, okay, that's really cool. You can draw for a living. Because I do love that. Like, back to what I said, like I love movies and film, probably more so than anything else in the world. And I'm like, that's cool in architecture. But I'm like, is that realistic? And the truth is, I was like really cocky in architecture school. I did really well because like I really loved it. And I worked really hard at it. And then I did well. So I'm like, I can do that. I can work at Pixar.
Nice.
So then I was like, you have to start somewhere. So I actually turned down jobs coming out of school in the Bay Area to move down to LA. Partially because my dad is an architect himself. And he was like, yeah, come work for me. I'm like, okay, that's so easy. Like, And I don't know if that was the best decision of my life, because I feel like wasting a bunch of years not doing anything at home, working for my dad.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but I saved money, but I didn't learn much. But the thing about going back home was I wanted to be in LA to study art. Well, at the time, I was actually interested in like concept art for games because I played a lot of video games. Yeah, so I kind of left that Pixar thing for a little while, and it introduced me to the idea that you can like do concept art. And part of the
Uh-huh.
thing about architecture was that in school, they don't teach you about the technicality of architecture and what it's like to work in architecture, the field as a job, but they teach you about like conceptual design and like thinking about art. So our projects were very, very conceptual, and they were all about like basically like pitching an idea for a building instead of actually, I mean, you're a college student, you have no way you can actually build something. So because I did well on that, I'd be like, okay, I'll probably do well in concept art too. It's just, a more BSc form of design and like architecture. You don't have to worry about the real stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then to this day, I still don't like architecture because of how much like building code and
Mm.
the real stuff that they don't teach you in school, but you find out all about it when you need to, become a licensed architect. You have to study and take like a test that I almost took. So, well, to continue that story, one of my friends who went to architecture school with me, who also, at the time, she was doing a lot of digital painting, and she told me about CDA. So I was like, oh, cool. And then, they have all the concept art stuff. So I was like, cool, I'll just take classes there while working in architecture and see where that goes. It didn't go very far because I was like extremely lazy. And I was just like comfortable living at home.
As in
Kind of
you
work.
weren't doing homework?
I was doing homework like the very lazy style because I didn't treat it like architecture school anymore. And I also, was working in architecture. So I couldn't give it the time of day that you really need to devote yourself to something like art. As we all know, like now, after the fact, it takes complete dedication to learn this and to study like the fundamental stuff that like every single art student goes through. You hear stories about art center, and that just reminds me of architecture. And I'm like, oh, but I can't really do that again.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't willing to do that again right after architecture school was over. But I ended up losing interest in concept art, to be honest. Yeah, I didn't like the concept art classes, to be completely honest. Not that they weren't taught well and they weren't good. It was more that they taught in a way of thinking about design that I'm kind of trained because of my design upbringing to think differently. And I couldn't really grasp it very well, and it's not the way I think. So I lost interest in it. And I also lost interest in a lot of those games, that were big at the time. And I lost interest in like a lot of like the live action stuff. And things like design just like silhouettes and to look cool, to look badass. Everything in architecture is like counter into that. It's always, form follows function. That sort of idea. And we always design, architecture design principles are always like conceptual and then really, really down to like the nitty gritty of like how many inches a window is from the wall is actually a huge decision. And I just felt like concept design ended up not going to that level.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, I think I was actually just being really cocky, to be honest. I'm like, I'm a designer. I know what I'm doing. Like I do real buildings. Just what is this? what is this like crappy building in the back of this video game that like someone designed and then they just half-assed it. But it's, the truth is it's not important to the video game. So I understand why there are like it's more about like video game levels, and like I totally understand it now. Not to I'm not talking shit about. There's so many amazing like concept artists I look up to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for me because I don't think that way. And if I do like get into it, I would probably go down a rabbit hole of thinking the wrong way and not being productive.
Mm-hmm.
So I lost interest in it, and I decided that I was just going to pursue architecture. And then I started like being more involved with, working for my dad and doing like more projects. And then I stopped taking CDA classes because I only took like one a term, kind of like it wasn't ever a heavy load. It was more like a hobby, to be honest, than anything. But the big thing to tie this story together back to what we're talking about is I took the landscape painting class at CDA. And that class was something that I fell in love with immediately, because it was no longer about like, concept design and like students BSing their way to, make concepts. It's about some sort of art experience, I guess. And I fell in love with that immediately. And I picked it up quite quickly just because it felt right. So that, after like my whole days at CDA.
And that was Peter Chan's class?
No, that was
class?
James Martin's class.
James Martin, okay.
Yeah, Todd and Oils. Yeah, it just felt right. And after that, I stopped taking classes and I just decided to just paint. Because, I think I'd be like, I can be an architect that paints. Like, we can paint my own buildings. That's cool, right? And once I did that and stopped worrying about like my career or trying to get a job, and I was just like, I'm going to do architecture. I was going to take my architecture general exams, which is like a 2-year, 3-year process. And I really did not want to like go through that process because it's studying and academia. But that year that I was painting by myself was the year I also got, quote unquote, like good at art, well, good enough at painting so that, I might be able to actually monetize it and actually make a living off of it, because I never painted with the intention to monetize it or like to make money off of it. But when I stopped thinking about it in a way where it was about finding a job, that was when like my arts clicked. And then, that year, then I went to Weekend Warriors, met you and Angela and all of them. And then that became, the whole animation thing just came out of nowhere. Well, not completely out of nowhere, because I studied at CDA, like James Martin was, at DreamWorks. He was working at DreamWorks at the time. And, I studied with Peter Chan, and he was at, he's in animation. Yeah, I think he was at Sony at the time. So I studied with a lot of animation industry people. And that idea of animation got into my head after realizing that the artists that I look up to the most, that I relate to the most, are the plein-air painters. And those names are like Dice Tsutsumi, Mike Hernandez, Nathan Fowlkes, the legends of the animation artist industry who their focus is color and light. As far as, I know, like every time I think about them, it's like beautiful, beautiful color. And then they have beautiful, beautiful plein-air paintings or landscape or traditional paintings to go with it. And then because I fell in love with landscape painting, those were the guys that I thought that I'm like, that's my path. I think I relate to them way more than I relate to like concept artists at whom at first I was looking at. I also like the idea of color and light more than like designing color and light is some weird abstract idea that's more, I don't know. I like to think in the abstract, in like the conceptual level. And I don't like material objects, so I'm not good at designing objects at all. But yeah, that idea got in my head, and I was like, okay, color and light animation, that's awesome. I love all the work that they do in animation. It's more lively, it's more, pushed, it's more stylized, it's more, to me, artistic. There was always a little bit after, I started getting better at painting. There was a little bit in the back of my head. I was like, okay, animation would be really cool to get into, but I didn't really apply to any like studios or anything because I'm just not like that. I just let things fall the way they fall.
Wow.
Which, yeah, it fell, and I met Angela, and she was like, hey, are you interested in animation? Want to paint for us? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't really even have a portfolio. But she's like, you paint well. I'm like, okay. And then they gave me like, a test, and then Rad, Seacrest, on Kipo, like my work. And they were like, yeah, we like your work. Come work for us. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So that's how I got into the industry. yeah, kind of unplanned. I mean, I don't want to say it's unplanned and like completely spontaneous because I'm not really like that of a guy. I still like think a lot and think everything through, but I do just let things fall in place. It made sense to me completely, and it's just because it felt natural more than anything else. Yeah, animation's working out great for me. I love my job right now and everything about it.
Yeah.
And
So are you doing art like 90% of your time?
No, hardly.
Really? What are you doing then?
Like the amount of time I actually spend painting versus the amount of time everything else is like maybe 10% of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, like 40% is sleeping, 20% is eating. No, but painting is, I guess I don't paint that much, but I guess I'm always thinking about it because it's kind of an obsession or a way of life now. Like, I mean, it might look impressive if I'm like, going out and painting every day, but that's really only like an hour of the day. And to me,
Which is a lot more than what a lot of people do.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that was a lot more than I've ever done before, like I got into the industry.
Going out and painting?
Yeah.
Or just painting in general?
Yeah, my old goal was like, I'm going to paint once a week, which is, pretty good for, a lot of people, and especially someone who's not like professional. But now it's like such a big part of my life. It feels weird if I don't paint constantly, or if I'm not constantly thinking about some aspect, not just painting, but some aspect about like design or life or ideas, really. It's actually idea driven, because what motivates me to paint or to create something is more about the idea than the actual physical object of a painting. To me, that's not really important. I mean, the way I think about painting or like plein air is it's a hobby that teaches you how to see, if that makes sense. Like, we keep telling like our students that I'm trying to train your eye so you can see in a different way. And why do painters see more colors than someone who's untrained? And it's not that our eyesights are any better. It's you learn how to see, and more importantly is you learn how to interpret what you see, because you choose what you put down and you choose how to interpret some mundane object, outdoors, some tree that you've driven by like 100 times. And the one time that you choose to sit down and paint it is the time that you choose, whether or not you realize that you're choosing how to interpret that tree and how to put it down on paper. And the paper or the canvas and the painting that results from it is just a figment of what you interpret. And, maybe if you're just a beginning painter, it might not be a great painting. But the idea that you took the hour to sit down on, or stand up and paint, and you took the hour to just stare profusely at some random object or some random scenery is a weird experience that I don't think a lot of people that are not painters would do, because why would you stare at the side of like a trash can for 2 hours to try and paint it?
Yeah.
But it teaches you to see, and it teaches you to interpret. And back to the original point, was that type of interpretation is what to me is fun about painting. It's less like the work. I hate dragging out my easel and like putting out my paints, but that experience of painting and interpreting is to me like life-changing, because again, all I do when you paint is you think, and you're just thinking about whatever you're painting. But after a while, when you like get used to painting, you stop thinking about how you mix paints. You don't worry about the technical aspect of painting, because you've done it 1,000 times. And then your mind just wanders about anything that's related to, might not be related to what you're painting, but that experience then somehow is confounded into some sort of image that you created during that time. So it's about that experience, and that experience is profoundly like meaningful to me. It's not like my paintings are any more profound than anyone else, but it's taught me to live my life in a way that's about like personal interpretation and like individuality. And that goes back to, you know, who I am as a person, how my dad knows me. And he's like, yeah, you're kind of full of yourself and you're really individual. And you just like, you think your ideas are better than everyone else's. I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, but you know, I have my own ideas, and creativity is just that. And, you know, my favorite artists are not artists that are technically great. There are artists who have some sort of interpretation that is so unique to their own eye that I would never be able to paint like that because I just don't see it that way. But that's the type of realm of painting that, you know, I want to push myself towards. And I'm definitely not even close to there yet because I'm not, like, it's a long journey.
So a lot of people, if they want to get into plein air painting, what kind of advice would you give them to help them get started?
On the very surface level, you know, if you want to get into it, you just have to try and see if it, you know, if it clicks with you. And I guess a lot of the why people are intimidated, or, you know, is the intimidation factor of it, or the idea that they have no idea, you know, what they're doing, so it just doesn't work at all. But look at resources, or go to Warrior Painters, or take my class.
That's right. You also teach painting.
Yeah, and you'll find a group of similar-minded people with the same interests. And once you find a group of people, then it's really easy to get into, because it's less about just painting, but it's more, there's also a community that's behind it, which is really important for, you know, any hobby or any activity. And there's a wonderful community called Warrior Painters. And there's also a wonderful art community, you know, in the animation industry and the fine arts industry, and they all overlap. So you just have to search for that. And then it's really easy. But the first step is just buy some paints, go outdoors, sit down. And the cool thing about painting is, you know, like I said, and the way I like it is because it's such an individual experience where, like, you know, there's a community that you can socialize with. But it's also like, I personally really like painting by myself or with small groups of people. Yeah, you can hide in your backyard and just try it. You know, it's an individual experience. And I think most people will find that individual experience will click with them if they are, you know, if they're interested in art, because it is something really fun. And to me, like, life-changing.
Yeah. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We love hearing from you, so please leave a comment and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to see more from the Warrior Painters, please consider donating to our Gumroad. You'll find the link in our description. Thanks, and see you again soon.